Welcome back to the 6th video of our series called Components. Today is a pretty big day. We'll be seeing how components work in Fusion. So let's hop straight into it. I'd firstly like to speak about what a component is. So in Fusion, you have this option up here called New Component. It's under the Assemble tab. When you create a new design, you create a main component. This square or this cube is your main design components. This history of design features is inside this component. So it's showing me what I've done to this component. If my wheel has multiple parts inside of it that then get assembled mechanically, before you make any design, you should start by separating your design into all of its components. So working on this component as the active component, I'll press New Components and call it Component 1. Okay. You can see this component has now become a subassembly. These 3 cubes means that it's not a component anymore, it's an assembly of components. So I can now press Component again, but be careful, since I am currently in Component 1, it's going to turn this component into another subassembly and add a component inside this component. So now component 2 is actually, you can see it turned into a subassembly. It's actually a component inside component 1. If I didn't want to do this, but make another component at the same level of component 1, I have to do Ctrl Z to go back, and I need to deselect this component as active. You can see that my wheel is now gray, light gray, like a shadow, because it's not selected. I am now working on component 1, and all these bodies and sketches are in my main components. They're right here. And so you can see my history tab is now empty, because I am not working on this wheel anymore. I am working on a new component. If I go back to the main components, I can see it again, and you can even see that I created a new component. It's for this reason that you want to create all your components at the beginning, and that you want to make sure that all of your designs are done in the respective components so that the history stays clear and you know which feature belongs to which component. So if we make a new component, now that we've left component 1 of an active component and we made the first wheel as the current active component, and we press on the same button, component 2, you can see component 1 is still a component, and now on the same level as component 1 is component 2. So what's the point of doing all this? Well, as I just said, you got a different history, and the bodies are stored in each respective component's place. So if I make a sketch now, working on component 2, so I am now active in component 2, and I will be editing component 2's parts, so its sketches, its bodies, and my history will be saved in component 2. I will not be changing the main assembly components. If I go to component 2, and once again, create a plane, choose a plane, create a sketch that's constrained, as we said, 100, finish sketch, you can see now it created a new sketch tab with sketch 1 that belongs to component 2. I can now extrude it and add a body now, come on, to component 2. And now on top of sketches, you also have bodies. And in this one, you can see body 1. So this is the point of components. I can now see body 1 as a full component and not as a shadow because I'm working on component 2 specifically. If I go back to first wheel, now everything becomes not a shadow anymore because this is the main subassembly. This is the main part. If I close this drop-down window, everything hides because everything is inside this first wheel. So this lets me update everything. So if you're creating components, but you never actually change your little eye right here to the respective components, all of your history will be saved in first wheel. So if now I say, okay, I'll create another part. So this is bad practice. Don't create new sketches like this. But let's say, and please constrain your sketches. Let's say that now I extrude another little bits to component 2. Well, this is still part of component 2 because it joined component 2. But now this sketch, which is clearly part of component 2, and this little nipple, which is clearly joined, you can see it here, joined with this body, which is in component 2, well, these two features are now saved in my history of my main design. That's not good, because if I go to component 2, well, I can see the body I just created, but this extrude right here is saved in there because it saw that it joined this body, but the sketch that I needed to create this extrude is still in my main assembly here. So if I want to change the diameter of this component 2, I actually have to find where the initial sketch comes from, and that's very complicated because you'll quickly fill up this entire history bar. So you really want to make your components as the first thing in any design, and make sure to be very rigorous and click on the right components to work on the right components when you want to edit or modify or update your component. That's very important. So typically we would go in here, delete these two features, delete them, and now we can go work on component 2 and create them again in component 2, being constraints and etc. And you can see if I extrude it out, now you have both the sketch and the extrude in component 2. If I choose component 1, now everything is a shadow, because in component 1 there's nothing. There's no bodies, there's no sketches. I'd like to show you what we'll do with our wheel. So we'd like to have a wheel that's rotating on an axle. So for this, we need to create an axle, we need to insert 2 ball bearings, and the motor that we previously designed. So let's once again make a quick sketch of what we want to do. This is a very important step to not be working completely blindfolded, not knowing where you're going. So this sketch, I'll actually make a cross section. So once again, our wheel is something like this. And if I split my wheel along this plane, if I make a plane right here in the center of the wheel, like this, and I split my plane, I split my wheel with this plane that's going through the center of the wheel, it's going to give me the cross section viewed like this from inside the wheel. So I'll start back in black, and I'll start by drawing the wheel. And this is it, we're done. So this was a 15 minutes time lapse of me actually designing this wheel kinematic, like mechanic load path point of view in Paint. Like I'm literally drawing with my mouse in Paint. Like it doesn't need to be complex, but making this cross section schematic is very important for you to understand where the load paths go through, where parts get screwed into each. That's absolutely fundamental. So we're actually going to be adapting our design from the previous video to match this kinematic design. I will not talk about how this functions and how I designed it and where I put the shoulders where and how, because this is not a mechanics class. This is a technical class to learn this program called Fusion360. So let's get straight to it. So first thing I'll do is I will adapt this rear bearing seat to have this shoulder. But before I do this, I'll show you how components work, which is the title of this video, by first importing the bearings. So as I said in the previous video, we do not need to draw our own ball bearings, because if we go on Google, for instance, we can find, or Mizumi for the website to be more precise, we can find the part numbers and then the CAD data for different parts, such as bearings or keyways, which you'll see right after. And you can just download the CAD in the official NSK or any other bearing manufacturer software, and then you can save it on your computer and click on File, Open. You can open another part from another drawing here, or you could actually open from my computer and then open a step file. So this is the rear bearing. I'll open it and you can see I have a stunning bearing with 2 races and all my ball bearings. So now that I have a bearing that's imported into Fusion, I can save it in my normal file hierarchy. So I'll just press Ctrl S. You can see from the asterisk that it's currently not saved. Ctrl S, and I can leave the part number. That's a very good practice to have, leaving the part number name. So if you forget what this part was, you can just type the component name into, for instance, Mizumi, and then find it again. So let's go back to Fusion and let's save this as a 6820. Here is our rear bearing. This is our front bearing, and which is smaller, and this is our QA for our motor. So the rear bearing has an ID. I can see this by pressing inspect, so I on my keyboard, or I can press this inspect or this measure button, and I click on, for example, this surface, radius 50, so diameter 100, or I can press again on inspect and press just on the circle, and it gives me the diameter right away. So inner diameter 100, outer diameter 125, perfect. And width we have from here to here 13. Okay. Alright, and one last thing before we finish the video about components. We can actually create components from bodies. So I've deleted all of our components that I created to show you how things worked, but I want to actually split this wheel into components. We should have, at the beginning of our wheel design, created all the components of all the parts of the wheel, but we didn't know what we needed. So it's not perfect. You shouldn't do it this way. Before you make any design, you should think it through, make sure that you know how many files you'll have, how many components each subfile will have and such, and you should make your components in advance to have this history at the right place. But what you can do is do this. Go from a body that's in the main. Once again, you should not have any components, any bodies, any sketches in your main. This is your main, basically. So let's make a new component from Wheel Hub. If you right click on a body, you can click on Create Components from Bodies. This will now create a new component that's called the same thing as a body used to be called, but you can see it's now not a cylindrical body like it used to be, like the tire is, but it's a whole component. So if I now go work on Wheel Hub, once again, I've lost my entire design history. So please don't do this, make these before, but at least I can now work on Wheel Hub and continue modifying it without having to bother between the Wheel Hub, the tire, and such. So one for Wheel Hub and another component for tire. Great, we now have our tire and our Wheel Hub. In the next video, we'll see how to insert the ball bearings as components too, and how to set joints between the tire and the Wheel Hub. It seems to be right here because the tire is at the right place, but you'll see it's not at all. We need to add joints. This will be the subject of the next video. See you soon.